All right, let's dive into something a little taboo. What if the government's debt and your debt were two sides of the same coin? I mean, mathematically linked. That's a wild idea from the anthropologist David Graeber that we're going to unpack today. And trust me, it's a concept that's so simple, but it completely flips how we think about the economy on its head. See, Graeber had this idea that economics is just riddled with what he called forbidding truths. These are basic principles that we kind of feel are true deep down, but nobody's ever supposed to talk about them. So, what's one of the biggest ones he pointed out? Well, it's this right here, the unspoken, unbreakable link between public debt and private debt. To put it another way, the amount of money the government owes is directly, and I mean mathematically, inescapably tied to the amount of money that we, the public, owe. Okay, to make this whole thing super clear, let's give it a name. We'll call it the Peter/Paul principle. It's just a simple way of thinking about it, but it reveals absolutely everything. So what is this Peter and Paul principle? Well, let's break it down. It all kicks off with a really simple game. Okay, just imagine we're in a room. It's a closed system. There are only two players, Peter and Paul, and there's a set number of poker chips on the table. Let's say there are 40 chips in total. That's it. That's all the money in our little economy. So when the game starts, things are perfectly even. Peter's got 20 chips, Paul's got 20 chips. Everything's balanced. Simple enough, right? Everyone's starting on an even keel. But then, what happens if Peter wins a hand? Let's say he gets 10 more chips. Now he's sitting on 30. But wait, since there are only 40 chips in the whole game, where did those 10 chips come from? They had to come from Paul. For Peter to get a 10-chip surplus, Paul has to take a 10-chip deficit. There's no other way. It's just basic math. And this is where the simple poker game suddenly gets very, very real. In this analogy, Peter. Well, Peter represents the government, the public sector. And Paul? Paul is everyone else. That's you. That's me. That's every household and every business in the country. Paul is the private sector. Now, it's super important to get this. This isn't some fancy economic theory or a political opinion. It's what's called an accounting identity. That's just a formal way of saying it's a mathematical fact. A public sector surplus always is, the private sector's deficit. And the other way around, too. They're a perfect mirror image. One goes up, the other has to go down. Okay, so we've got this mirror thing down. Public and private debt are linked, which probably leads you to a pretty logical question, right? If it's all just a zero-sum game, why does there have to be any debt in the first place? Let's get into where money actually comes from. I mean, seriously, why can't everyone, the government, people, businesses, just live within their means? Just balance the books and have zero debt. That's what we're all told is the responsible thing to do, right? And the answer is one of those huge taboos Graeber was talking about. Because if everyone, the government included, was completely debt-free, there wouldn't be any money at all. I know, that sounds completely bonkers, but it's because of what money fundamentally is. At its core, all modern money is debt. Just think of a dollar bill or a 5-pound note, not as a little piece of value, but as a circulating IOU. It's just a promise, a record of a debt that can be passed from person to person. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. Just pull out a banknote, any banknote. It literally says it right on there. I promise to pay the bearer. It is, word for word, an IOU from the central bank. It's a physical token of government debt. So basically, in our economy today, money gets created in two main ways. First, when the government spends more money than it brings in through taxes, that creates money in the form of bonds or cash. And second, when a regular bank gives you a loan, say for a car or a house. In both cases, new money is created from debt. Okay, let's recap. We've got two huge pieces of the puzzle. One, the Peter/Paul mirror thing, where public and private debt are linked. And two, the fact of money is debt. So what happens when you put those two ideas together? Well, that's where we get to what you could call the great debt transfer. So when a politician stands up and says they're going to act responsibly and pay down the national debt, that debt doesn't just disappear into thin air. Remember Peter and Paul? It has to go somewhere. And Graeber's point was that where it goes has less to do with who's been responsible and everything to do with who has the power to push it onto someone else. Let's walk through how this actually works. Step 1, the government runs a surplus. That means it takes more money in taxes from all of us than it spends back out into the economy. That money is literally pulled out of the private sector. It's taken from Paul's stack of chips. So to cover their costs, to buy homes, to run their businesses, people and companies have to borrow more. And boom, just like that, the government surplus has been transformed into our private debt. It shows up as mortgages, credit card debt, student loans, you name it. And all of this leads us to the final and, let's be honest, probably the most uncomfortable truth in this whole discussion. Here it is, plain and simple. This is the whole point of the Peter/Paul principle. Because of that mirror image, that accounting identity, if the government balances its books, it mathematically makes it almost impossible for you, for the private sector as a whole, to balance yours. So, the next time you hear someone on the news demanding that the government act like a household and pay back the national debt, just think back to Peter and Paul. Remember the poker chips? For Peter, the government, to pile up a surplus, then Paul, the rest of us, has to go into deficit. It's not a choice, it's just how the math works. And that leaves us with a pretty big and kind of unsettling final question. This whole system seems to be built on just shifting debt back and forth between Peter and Paul. But what happens when regular people, when families and businesses can't take on anymore? What happens when our side of the ledger is maxed out? What happens when the whole system hits its limit? Now that's something to think about.